A few months back, I returned home from my largest theme park trip ever, more than 6 weeks across greater than 10 European countries. And it's been tradition here on Coaster Dash that whenever I visit a park with greater than 5 roller coasters, we rank their lineup from worst to best. Our first stop on the continent this time around was England's Thorpe Park, located right outside the city of London. According to many, this is the United Kingdom's roller coaster capital with 8 scream machines that all have something unique and exciting to offer. For me, there isn't much debate. I 1000% agree with the consensus, as I was overall very impressed by Thorpe Park's variety. I do have to begin on a sour note, however. One of the park's more iconic rides, I would argue, Colossus, was not one I had the chance to experience. It was open for the first quarter of our one day in the park, and then proceeded to run tests all the way until close, never actually reopening. Of course, part of me wants to beat myself up over the fact that I didn't experience the coaster prior to it shutting down, but there isn't much of a point, especially since the rest of our visit went extremely well. But to talk a little bit about Colossus, the ride originally opened in 2002 and was manufactured by Intamin. This was a model I never experienced before, which made this loss hurt quite a bit more, but it's their 10 inversion layout found only at a few parks worldwide. From what I hear, it isn't exactly the smoothest, highest quality attraction by today's standards, but any coaster nerd would want to know what that quadruple Heartline roll feels like. I think I'd predict this one to rank at number 6, but I don't feel comfortable giving a solid placement to a coaster I have not ridden unless it was extremely obvious. Let me know in the comments if I'm right in my assessment, and for that matter, what your Thorpe Park rankings look like in general, but otherwise let's go ahead and get the show on the road. Taking the rear at number 7 is Flying Fish, a Mock Rides powered coaster, which opened in 2007. Serving as Thorpe Park's junior coaster, I have to say this is far from a bad option for younger guests. Though some would debate whether or not this even qualifies as a roller coaster, with it primarily running on electricity as opposed to gravity, what isn't deniable is it's got a decent little layout with multiple helices and an enjoyable sense of speed. Main reason it places at the bottom is because it doesn't cater to my audience, and I find that the rides I've placed higher pack an objectively more interesting elements. Number 6 is Walking Dead the Ride, a Vekoma family coaster that opened in 1996. I'll say, I pretty much went into this ride with no expectations, as I hear practically zero coaster enthusiasts ever bring it up. As a result, I'd say I was very surprised by the ride experience on offer. This model more specifically is the Dutch company's Enigma product, of which only 2 have ever been built, and the other one is all the way in Egypt. My first impression was that the theming was going to be pretty dark and also quite well done. As someone who has never watched The Walking Dead, I wasn't sure what was going on exactly, but that didn't hinder my enjoyment by any means. Of the family coaster variety, this is definitely a family thrill, which makes sense with the theme, and man, that layout is just so fun. There's loads of swooping turns and surprisingly whippy transitions, though I'd imagine it's pretty difficult for you to see with how dark it is in that building. But you top it all off with some surprising tricks and thematic features, and you've got yourself an impressive little ride that too often gets overlooked by those visiting the park. What could make it better is maybe a bit of a longer layout, but with all the following coasters delivering much more intense layouts, it's just got some stiff competition. Number 5, Nemesis Inferno, a Bolliger & Mabillard inverted coaster that opened in 2003. Taking a big leap in thrill level, this surprisingly small ride stands less than 100 feet tall, but more than makes up for it by offering an intense sequence of elements. But before we get there, I was caught pretty off guard by the pre-lift section of Nemesis Inferno, which is also a trait you'll see with a number of rides coming up. It's nothing overly crazy, but does spice things up before the coaster really gets going. From the apex of the lift hill, riders will be blasted by positive G-force time and time again, namely on the 4 different inversions: a loop, 0 G-roll, and interlocking set of corkscrews, which is a particular favorite of mine as this is the only ride of its kind out there to feature the element. Other notes are that it's still very smooth after more than 2 decades of operation, and the theming/presentation is above and beyond for a thrill coaster. You could argue it's a bit on the short side, which I think I'd agree with, but more so my number 1 complaint is when you compare Nemesis Inferno to other inverts from B&M, it's surprisingly lacking in whip. From off-ride, it doesn't seem that way, and it's also weird because Nemesis Inferno is forceful in other ways, but I'd say it's a relative flaw caused by its short trains. I think had the coaster been whippier, it could have placed a spot higher on my list. Number 4, Saw the Ride, a Gerstlauer Eurofighter coaster, opened in 2009. At least amongst British coaster enthusiasts, I hear a fair bit of hate surrounding this coaster, usually relating to it being rough, and while I'll agree with the consensus that it could track smoother, I feel that this undermines things Saw does so well. For starters, I'd consider this the most themed coaster at Thorpe Park, which is impressive given its competition, and it's dark too. This is best seen in the pre-lift section, which is absolutely fantastic, consisting of a few dips and an inline twist over a pool of blood. Of course, I always enjoy a 90-degree lift tilt as they freak me out just about every single time, followed by that 100-degree beyond vertical drop which flings you up out of your seat. The main layout encapsulates some very forceful turns and inversions, with exceptional pacing nearly the entire time. The only time you really catch your breath is on Saw's mid-course brake run, but I'd argue that shouldn't even really count, as it runs with no trims almost every single cycle. All in all, expectations were thoroughly exceeded by this one, and I'd urge you to give it a fair shake before judging it for yourself. Still, I would have liked it to be a bit longer, and as I said, I agree it's not the smoothest ride in the world. Number 3, Swarm, a Bolliger and Mabillard wing coaster that opened in 2012. I've been a fan of every single wing coaster I've ever ridden, and I find the B&M model as a whole to be quite underrated. However, most don't necessarily blow me away like Swarm did. From start to finish, its layout is powerful, smooth, well-paced, and even features a couple near-miss elements, which always adds a lot to the B&M wing model. At 2,500 feet in length, it's not especially long and could afford a few extra maneuvers, but for what it manages to pack in, I have little to nothing bad to say about this ride. It felt especially forceful relative to other wing coasters, with some enjoyable low-to-the-ground sections and a tad whippier than average, which you see in the foreign versions. That wing over drop is spectacular and very freaky, and the 3 subsequent rolls are all a little different from one another, which adds some variety. Tack on some theming and special effects, bam, that's pretty much a summary of what you can expect from Swarm. Fantastic coaster overall, it should absolutely be one of your priorities at Thorpe Park. Number 2, Stealth, an Intamin launch coaster that opened in 2006. While few thrill coasters are as short in duration as Stealth, few are also as intense and extraordinary. The ride is characterized by 2 elements, that initial launch, which is one of the most forceful operating in the world, as well as that 205-foot tall top hat, which for a while made this the tallest roller coaster in the park. I love the build and anticipation as you gear up for that rapid acceleration. There are all these cool sounds and effects that either make you nervous or incredibly excited for what's to come, or maybe both if you're like me. Taking off to 80 miles per hour in a span of less than 2 seconds is a sensation that I can't even explain in words. This is only possible thanks to Intamin's hydraulic launch technology, which sadly has become a dying breed over the last couple of years, so it was great to see Stealth going strong with swift operations. Following this, the top hat is almost just as good as you rocket 90 degrees straight up at the sky, crest the top with plenty of speed, and drop down the same 90 degrees you came. And an underrated aspect is gaining all that momentum back up at the bottom of the drop, because that allows for the enjoyment of that crazy sense of speed a whole other time. The main criticism I have for this one should be fairly obvious. It's painfully short, but I'd rather have a short coaster pack a crazy punch rather than a long coaster that meanders and doesn't do a whole lot. By my accounts, Stealth is one of the biggest coaster adrenaline rushes out there, which is why it took silver on today's list. Still, there was never much of a doubt which ride would top it. At the number 1 spot is Hyperion, a mock rides hypercoaster that opened in 2024. It had been 12 years since Thorpe Park last received a new roller coaster, which is why it was imperative for whatever would come next to make a big splash. Despite many coaster fans having high expectations for this project, I'd argue the park went above and beyond to deliver something truly sensational. Hyperion instantly claimed a bunch of records, namely becoming the tallest and fastest roller coaster in the United Kingdom, which hadn't been topped in 30 years. Not only that, but the ride would feature some of the most unusual elements added to any coaster. That first drop is simply magical, the highest beyond vertical descent ever built, providing heaps of airtime. The subsequent Immelman is my favorite of its kind of experience, with more glorious sustained airtime at its apex. And then you have a genuinely ridiculous moment that I cannot believe was even attempted, an elongated outer banked airtime hill which continues to rotate until you're upside down. I'd put this up there as a top 10, maybe top 5 coaster element ever for me, and then to round out an unbelievable stretch, you have that massive dive loop, which is also basically a stall, and if it classifies as such, is one of my favorite stalls ever. Unfortunately, Hyperion more or less dies after this point with an obnoxious section of trim brakes and 2 small airtime hills into the brake run. I absolutely hate those trims, they are a major buzzkill, and I'd also say the ride falls a bit on the short side, but the latter is a minor complaint, so for me to have only one major one regarding an otherwise perfect coaster, that really means something. To me, Hyperion isn't just Thorpe Park's best roller coaster, it's by a long shot the best in the United Kingdom, and I'd even go as far as to say one of the very best in Europe as well. The United Kingdom didn't always have that one standout ride, but good things happen to those who wait, and Hyperion is proof of that. But yeah, there you go. Thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to Coaster Dash for more content like this in the future. I appreciate the support, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.